I pretended to have lost the $7 million inheritance I received, and that's how I discovered who my husband really was. But before we start, tell me in the comments which city you're tuning in from. I'd love to know how far my story has traveled. Now get ready. It wasn't death that broke her. It was love disguised as loyalty. Chloe was 41, with a look that spoke of a quiet war. Not one fought with weapons, but one that occurs in silence. In the kitchen of a modest house, between double shifts, laundry hanging in the sun, and averted glances tasting of routine. She was one of those women who carry life on their shoulders without complaint, who embrace without question, who give without calculation, because her heart was always bigger than her fears. She lived with Marcus, her husband of 12 years, in a simple house with time-cracked walls and a corrugated roof that barely held up against heavy rain. But for Chloe, that home was enough. She never cared about the lack of luxuries. She felt rich in other ways, or at least that's what she repeated to herself when she woke up with an aching back after cleaning other people's homes for 10 hours a day. Marcus, 45, was an electrician. At least, that's what he claimed, because in reality, for the past 2 years, the wires he touched most often were those of his phone. Always hidden, always silent. Though there were days he was kind. "I love you" hadn't come easily in a long time, and his kisses tasted not of love but of habit. "Go, you worked too hard, honey," Marcus would say some nights when she arrived with hands red from bleach and a back twisted from exhaustion. "I know, but it's all for us," Chloe would reply, smiling with a broken soul and swollen feet. He would merely nod and return to watching TV. Sometimes not even that. He'd just lock himself in the bathroom with his cell phone for half an hour. She no longer asked. She was afraid to face a truth she wasn't ready for. Chloe's life was the same every day. Wake up at 5:30 a.m., prepare coffee, warm up toast, fold laundry, grab her work bag, and go clean the homes of other women who had what she never dreamed of: comfort, time, peace of mind. Sometimes she wondered if she would ever know that kind of life, but she always answered herself the same way. I wasn't put on this earth for that. Until the call came. It was an ordinary Monday, one of those that smelled of weariness from the start. The landline rang at 8:12 a.m. Chloe was about to leave, keys in hand and bag over her shoulder. "Hello," she said, her voice rushed. "Is this Ms. Chloe Ramirez?" A voice with a legal, corporate accent replied. "Yes, speaking. We are calling from Legacy Associates Legal in Miami, Florida. We are reaching out on behalf of the late Ms. Ophelia Aguilar." Chloe froze. She hadn't heard that name since she was a child. Ophelia, her mother's older sister, had disappeared from the family map over 30 years ago. No one ever heard from her again. The rumor was she had run off with a millionaire, Yankee. But they were just rumors. "Ms. Aguilar passed away 3 weeks ago, and you are named as the sole heir in her will." "Excuse me?" Chloe managed, feeling her legs tremble. "You have inherited $7 million. The phone dropped to the floor. She didn't scream, didn't cry, didn't laugh. She just felt the world stop spinning for a few seconds. 7 million. Not 1,000, not a lottery prize, not a stroke of luck. 7 million. 10 minutes passed before she could react. She turned on the TV, not to watch anything, but to drown out the echo of her ragged breathing. She sat on the edge of the bed, her hands sweating. "What do I do with this now?" she whispered. It wasn't excitement she felt. It was fear, because Chloe knew that money doesn't change people. It reveals them. And that's when, for the first time in her life, she became afraid of her own husband. She didn't go to work that day. She faked a fever. Marcus didn't ask many questions. He just said, "Rest. I'll make you some tea." That tea tasted different, of forced affection. That night, Marcus looked at her in a way he hadn't in years. "My love, you look radiant." Chloe raised an eyebrow. He never used the word radiant. Marcus was more a normal, fine, or sure kind of guy. "Well, I feel exhausted," she replied. "We should take a vacation, even if it's just to a small town. It would do us good." A vacation? Marcus had never wanted to leave the city. He always said it was a waste of time and money. That night, for the first time, Chloe couldn't sleep. Not because of the news, but because of her husband's strained smile as he slept. Days passed, and each one felt like stepping into a parallel dimension. Marcus started waking up early, making breakfast, preparing her clothes, and leaving little notes on the counter, just like in their first years. "You're the best thing that ever happened to me. Thank you for existing. I love you, Chloe." Chloe read them, saved them, and analyzed them. Every word sounded nice, but they didn't feel sincere. It was as if someone else had written them. Linda, her best friend, noticed immediately. What's with the sudden affection? Did your husband swallow a romance novel or something? She joked, laughing as they had coffee on the porch. He seems like a different person, Chloe replied, not laughing. Linda looked at her seriously. Have you told him about the inheritance yet? No, and I won't yet. Chloe's voice had a tremor she'd never shown before, and Linda picked up on it. Are you scared? Something worse? I have doubts. Marcus began making plans. I've been looking at some houses in a new neighborhood. It's not luxury, but it's nice. You deserve more. Chloe listened, pretending to smile, but inside, an alarm went off with every sentence. One night, Marcus arrived with flowers, tulips, her favorites, but he hadn't given her any in over 8 years. What are we celebrating? Chloe asked, accepting them. Nothing or everything. We're celebrating that we're alive. Chloe thought, or you're celebrating that you already know about the money and aren't telling me. And then she began to suspect something more serious. What if Marcus had known about the inheritance before she did? What if that call hadn't been as unexpected as it seemed? She decided to run a test. She hid the envelope with the legal documents deep in the back of a closet, under some old blankets. The next day, when she returned from work, the blankets had been moved. She skipped dinner that night. She locked herself in the bathroom and cried. She cried because she couldn't trust, because she didn't know if her life was real or a carefully constructed fiction of convenience. Linda found her 2 days later, sitting in the kitchen with a cup of cold coffee and a vacant stare. You know, don't you? Linda said, cutting straight to the point. I don't know anything, and I don't want to accuse him without proof, but something doesn't add up. What if you try something else? Like what? What if you pretend you lost everything? Chloe looked at her, then fell silent. Her face didn't show surprise, and for the first time she said it out loud. What if I pretend I lost everything just to see who stays? Linda squeezed her hand. That's when you'll discover everything, Chloe. There's no better proof than the one that reveals itself. And Chloe, still tearful, nodded. The game had begun, and love was about to be put to the test. The setup, the fake loss. The idea hung in the air like a heavy cloud. Chloe didn't sleep that night, nor the next. She tossed and turned while Marcus snored with a peace that felt alien, strange, almost cruel to her. Linda's words spun in her head like an infinite carousel. What if she pretended to have lost everything? What if the only way to know the truth was to let him believe there was nothing left to gain? The next morning, before the sun hit the corrugated roof, Chloe dialed a number she hadn't used in years. The voice that answered was firm and clear. Mr. Robert Morgan, Linda's trusted lawyer, someone serious, discreet, and experienced in handling delicate matters. Chloe spoke little, only that she needed to simulate a total loss of an inheritance. Nothing illegal, nothing that would compromise anyone, just a simulation, a kind of emotional trap, a personal test. The lawyer, after a few seconds of silence, agreed with a warning. Tests like these can have consequences. You can't play with others' souls without being willing to lose a part of your own. Chloe didn't reply because deep down, she already felt she had lost too much. Linda accompanied her to the office. They signed fictitious documents and drafted a report that simulated a failed investment in a fraudulent company in Panama, complete with official-looking stamps, letters, and a legal notice. Everything looked legitimate. The document clearly stated that the $7 million inheritance had been lost in a poorly managed operation by an intermediary, a catastrophic, irreversible error. That very evening, Chloe left the opened letter on the dining table, highly visible, like someone leaving a bomb and waiting for the explosion. Marcus arrived with the same measured, controlled, forced smile he'd been using lately. He kissed her forehead and headed straight for the kitchen. As he passed, his eyes grazed the letter. He stopped. He picked it up without asking permission. He began to read. "What is this?" he asked, his tone so neutral that to Chloe it sounded rehearsed. She feigned surprise. She lowered her gaze, sighed, and said, "It's real. I lost everything. It was a scam. I didn't know how to handle it." Marcus stood still. He didn't say anything for a moment, just stared at the paper. Then he set it down on the table, scratched his chin, and asked, "And how do you plan to fix it?" There was no comfort. "No, the important thing is that you're okay." Just a direct, dry question, as if the money were the only factor that mattered. Chloe felt something crack inside. Still, she continued the game. "There's no way. The lawyer says it's irrecoverable. It's like I never had it." Marcus nodded. Not a single tear, not a gesture of support. "Well, at least we still have the house," he said, pouring himself a glass of water as if discussing the weather. Chloe didn't answer. She watched him closely. He avoided her gaze, keeping his eyes on the floor on his own hands, as if already calculating the most profitable exit. The following days were a collection of small details that said everything. Marcus started coming home late. He claimed he was taking extra hours, that the work had become heavy, that he was being exploited, but his shirts smelled different. Not of sweat or tools, but of cheap, sweet, persistent perfume. A fragrance that didn't belong in any of the homes he visited for electrical repairs. Every night, upon returning, he avoided eye contact. He ate in silence. He said he was tired. He took longer showers. He didn't leave his cell phone unguarded. Before, he'd leave it charging in the kitchen. Now he took it even into the bathroom. Chloe started writing everything down in a notebook, date, time, details. Like an emotional detective. Not to punish, only to understand, because nothing hurt more than silence disguised as routine. A week later, Marcus proposed something that chilled her to the bone. "I've been thinking," he said, stirring his coffee. "Maybe we should sell the house. With the money gone, there's no point in keeping something this big. We could move to something smaller, more affordable. That way you don't stress about the bills." "Are you saying you want to sell the only thing we have?" Chloe asked, not hiding her astonishment. "It's not for me, it's for you. You've been through a lot, you're tense. It would be a new beginning." She didn't reply. She felt the ground open up beneath her feet. Not because of the proposal, but because of the coldness with which he said it. There was no affection, no understanding. Just calculation. A new beginning. But new for whom? That night, Linda came to see her. Chloe told her everything. The late arrivals, the perfume, the proposal to sell the house, the notebook. "Chloe, that's not love or even respect. That's pure self-interest." Chloe closed her eyes. "I know, but I want to be sure. I want to catch him in his own words. No excuses." Linda stroked her hand. "How far are you willing to go?" "As far as he takes me." 3 more days passed. Marcus began to talk more often about the future. "We could leave the country, look for a new life, start from scratch. I know someone who can help us with the paperwork." Chloe nodded, smiled, recording every word in her mind. His voice was softer, kinder, but behind every phrase was a thread of anxiety, as if time were running out for him. The confirmation and the crime. Then came the scene Chloe would never forget. She was at a downtown coffee shop waiting for him for lunch. Marcus had said he had an errand nearby and would meet her in half an hour. She ordered a tea and a guava pastry. She sat by the window. She watched the clock patiently. 15 minutes later, she saw him. Marcus was walking on the opposite sidewalk. He wasn't alone. He was accompanied by a young woman, about 22, thin with dark curly hair. They were walking arm in arm, laughing, conspiratorial. She was stroking his beard. He was whispering in her ear. Chloe couldn't move. The tea went cold. The pastry remained untouched. Her breathing became shallow. Her heart, a stone in her chest. She watched until they disappeared down a side street. She didn't follow them. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She only thought one thing. That man was no longer hers. Perhaps he never was. She walked home slowly, head bowed. On the way, the faces of people seemed more real than ever. The mothers selling sweets on the street, the children asking for coins, the men smoking on the corners. And she, Chloe, walking among them with an invisible wound that no one could see. That night, Marcus arrived with a grocery bag. "I bought ground beef. I thought I'd make meatballs the way you like them." Chloe smiled politely. "Where did you get the money for that?" "A friend loaned it to me. I'll tell you later. Tonight, I want us to have a quiet dinner." They ate in silence. Marcus watched her out of the corner of his eye. Chloe kept her composure. Inside, everything was burning. At 2 a.m., Chloe woke up to a noise. The bathroom door closed. She heard Marcus talking on the phone. He lowered his voice, but not enough. "Yes, my love, don't worry, we'll be free soon. She doesn't suspect a thing." And then Chloe knew. Love isn't tested. Real love needs no proof. Only deception needs disguises. And Marcus's was beginning to fall apart. She couldn't get the phrase she'd heard in the middle of the night out of her head. The words were etched like a sentence. She doesn't suspect a thing. They weren't mere sounds, they were knives. They slowly pierced her, opening cracks in her soul. From then on, every minute next to him became an act of resistance. She pretended, she smiled, she cooked, she slept beside him, but inside, a storm was silently brewing. The following Sunday, Marcus said he was going to work on an electrical installation outside the city. Routine work, he claimed. Chloe nodded, kissed his cheek, and waited for him to leave. But as soon as the door closed, she quickly dressed, grabbed her bag, and went out, walking a safe distance behind him. She followed him through alleys, corners full of vendors, and bus stations until she saw him get into a cab. She did the same, hailing another car 2 vehicles behind. She asked the driver to follow discreetly. After 20 minutes, Marcus's car stopped in front of a small, rundown motel with dim signs. Chloe felt her stomach clench. She slowly got out and hid behind a tree. She didn't have to wait long. A few minutes later, she saw him emerge, not alone but accompanied. A thin young woman with curly hair, no older than 22. They walked arm in arm. Marcus laughed. She touched his face with a tenderness that couldn't be faked. Chloe's blood ran cold, not because of the gestures or the motel, but because that face was familiar. Too familiar. She waited for them to walk away. She didn't follow. She just stood there, feet planted firmly on the ground, her throat dry. She walked home in silence. Slow steps, head bowed. She locked herself in the bedroom and pulled out an old box of photos she kept under the bed. She went through them one by one until she found it. A faded paper image taken at a family gathering many years ago. In the right corner, almost unnoticed, was that girl Lucy, the daughter of her half-brother George, who had died in an accident over a decade ago. The young woman walking arm in arm with her husband was her niece by marriage. Chloe felt something inside her definitively break. The pieces began to move in her head. She didn't understand everything, but she knew that what was happening was no longer just a romantic betrayal. It was something dirtier, deeper, crueler. Her blood boiled. She felt betrayed not just as a wife, but as a woman, as an aunt, as a human being. She didn't confront him yet. Not yet. The rage was so intense that she needed time to avoid acting on impulse. Instead, she started looking for answers. She checked documents, invoices, the trash, even the mailbox he usually opened first. In less than 3 days, she found a series of papers with strange names, numbers marked in red ink, and illegible stamps. One sheet caught her attention. It had Marcus's signature and an amount written in dollars, $3,000. Then another, $5,000. Another, $9,000. At the bottom, a name scribbled by hand, Elias. Chloe noted every detail in her notebook. The next morning, she pretended to go to work, but went straight to the neighborhood where she knew loan sharks operated. It didn't take long to find answers. A merchant told her that Elias was a known moneylender, notorious for his aggressive methods of collecting debts. If Marcus was involved with him, the situation was more serious than she had imagined. She walked for hours as if lost until her body gave out. She sat on a bench in the Central Park, called Linda, and asked to meet. Seeing her, she broke down. "I don't know if I'm in the middle of a betrayal or something much worse," she said, her voice trembling. Linda hugged her. She didn't ask many questions, just said, "You are not alone and you will not let this sink you." That night, while Marcus was sleeping, Chloe checked his cell phone as he showered. She found dozens of deleted messages, but also one he'd forgotten to erase. It was a brief conversation with someone saved as L. The message read, "It'll be resolved tomorrow. If all goes well, in a month, it'll be just you and me. She doesn't count anymore." Chloe closed her eyes tightly. She needed an out. She needed to know who the man with whom she had shared over a decade of her life really was. Then she remembered Marcus's mother, Ramona, a dry but clear-headed woman who lived alone in a small house in the countryside, surrounded by chickens and memories. The next day, without telling anyone, Chloe took a bus there. Ramona received her with surprise. They hadn't seen each other in a long time. "What brings you here, honey?" she asked, pouring coffee into chipped mugs. Chloe looked the woman in the eye. She wasn't one for pleasantries. "I need you to tell me the truth about your son. About what happened with my father." The silence was long. Only the crowing of the roosters and the crunching of dry branches in the yard could be heard. Ramona put a hand to her chest and sighed. "You don't know the whole truth. I always suspected Marcus," she said, lowering her voice. "I suspected that your father and Marcus had a bad fight shortly before he died. No one knew. I knew because Marcus came home with blood on his shirt and said he'd fallen off his motorcycle, but the bike was clean, and his knuckles were bruised." Chloe felt her chest tighten. The memory of her father returned like a storm. She had always believed his death was a highway accident caused by distraction. Now doubt began to take shape. "Why were they fighting?" she managed to ask. "Your father meddled in everything. He said Marcus was no good, that he was hiding things, that you deserved better. And one day, they met at the workshop where he worked. No one ever knew what happened there. But after that, your father left and never came back." Chloe rose, her face pale. Ramona tried to take her hand, but she pulled away. "Thank you. I needed to know," she said before leaving. She returned home in silence. She no longer cried, no longer trembled, she only thought. That night she couldn't sleep. The images of the motel, the cell phone messages, the debts, the name Elias, her mother-in-law's warning. Everything mixed in her head like a poison jigsaw puzzle. She felt that the Marcus she knew had never existed, that everything had been a disguise, that what they shared had been a lie sustained for years. Then the phone rang. It was her mother, Petronila. "Honey, I feel very bad. I can't breathe right." Chloe immediately dressed, took a taxi, and went to her mother's house in a forgotten part of the city. She found her in bed, her face ashen, trembling with fever. She called emergency services. They took her to the nearest hospital. There, after several tests, the doctors confirmed what she didn't want to hear. Advanced, very aggressive cancer. "We are very sorry." Chloe was left alone in the hallway, her forehead pressed against the wall. Silent tears fell down her cheeks. Not for herself, not for Marcus, but for her mother, for the life that was falling apart just when she thought she could rebuild it, for the pain that offered no respite. That night, watching her mother sleep on the gurney, surrounded by machines and the smell of disinfectant, Chloe understood something she had refused to accept until now. She had lost everything that money cannot recover, and worst of all, the biggest traitor slept beside her every night. The decision and the trap. Chloe returned from the hospital with her clothes impregnated with chlorine and disinfectant, her eyes red from lack of sleep, her throat tight from crying in silence. She walked through the hallway of her house like a shadow, her feet dragging more than advancing, her gaze empty, and her hands icy. She opened the door to her bedroom, and there he was, Marcus, sleeping as if the world wasn't falling apart. He breathed calmly, hugging a pillow, oblivious to everything that was happening. Or perhaps not oblivious, but indifferent. She stood watching him from the doorway. She didn't hate him. It was worse. She felt nothing, no rage, no love, no hope. Just a void, a hole that occupied her chest. She turned and closed the door softly. She didn't want to wake him. It wasn't worth it. She didn't sleep a wink that night. Sitting in the kitchen, the light off and a cup of cold tea in her hands, she reviewed every moment of her life. How she met Marcus, what attracted her to him, his carefree smile, his attitude as a strong but simple man. All of it now seemed like a cleverly constructed mask, nothing more than a facade. At 6 a.m., the phone vibrated. It was a message from the hospital. Petronila had suffered respiratory complications during the night. They recommended immediate admission to palliative care. Chloe had no choice. She took her things and left without saying goodbye. The misery of the public health system hit her in the face as soon as she arrived. The room was overcrowded. There weren't enough beds. A doctor explained that chemotherapy was no longer viable. The tumor had invaded the lymphatic system. They could only manage the pain, and even that was limited. They needed expensive medications that were not available there. Chloe approached the counter and asked the price. The nurse checked a list. She gave her the figure without looking her in the eye. It was more than any humble person could raise in weeks. Chloe's stomach clenched. She had that money. She could pay for everything, but if she did, the lie would fall apart. Marcus would know she hadn't lost the inheritance, and if he knew, he could react in many ways. None of them good. She spent the night next to her mother. She stroked her hand as she slept deeply, sedated. Occasionally, she would open her eyes but no longer spoke clearly. She murmured nonsensical phrases. Sometimes she said the name of her dead husband, sometimes Chloe's, sometimes neither. In the morning, when she returned home, she found Marcus drinking coffee on the porch. "Is everything okay?" he asked without standing up. "My mother is dying," she replied emotionlessly, as if only reporting the weather. "I'm sorry," he said without expression. "You don't have to say it if you don't mean it," Chloe retorted, opening the door. Marcus didn't flinch. "I have to leave town tomorrow. Urgent job. I won't be back for a few days." She didn't answer. She walked straight to the bedroom, closed the door, and felt like screaming, but she didn't even have the strength for that. Later, Linda came to visit. Seeing her, Chloe burst into tears. She cried as she hadn't since everything began. Linda said nothing. She just hugged her and waited. When the storm passed, she spoke firmly. "You know everything now. What are you waiting for to confront him?" "I don't have proof," Chloe replied, wiping her face. "I can't destroy him with conjecture. I need something solid, something he can't deny." Linda got up, walking around the room thoughtfully. "What if we look through his papers? Maybe there's something." "I already did. I found invoices, weird names, transfers, but everything is confusing. It's like he did it on purpose so nothing would make sense. Linda fell silent. Then she said, I know someone. A retired accountant, an expert in tracking asset movements. Maybe he can help you. Chloe accepted. They called the lawyer, Robert Morgan, who agreed to help without hesitation. In less than a week, he handed her a confidential report. The words hit her with every line. Marcus had initiated procedures to transfer the property of the house to Lucy's name. Not only that, but he had also put a supposed investment account, about to be opened in a foreign digital bank, in her name. Everything pointed to one thing. He planned to run away with her and leave Chloe with nothing. Chloe's blood boiled. She couldn't believe how far that man was capable of going. How many years had he been building that web of lies? The following night, upon returning from the hospital, she found Marcus talking on the back patio phone. He didn't see her. She stood still behind the kitchen curtain, listening. Almost there. I just need her to sign that paper. After that, we're out. She has no idea. What happened with the old man was just the beginning. This will be final. Chloe clapped a hand over her mouth to suppress a scream. What happened with the old man was just the beginning. What did that mean? Was he referring to her father, to what Ramona had told her? She returned to her room, trembling. She waited for him to fall asleep. Then she searched through the old boxes in the closet. She knew he kept things from his youth there, photos, memorabilia, papers. Everything was disorganized, magazines, tools, unmarked envelopes, until she found a yellow envelope. It had no name. Inside were several old photos. In one of them, clearly taken at the neighborhood mechanic's workshop, her father appeared with Marcus. Both were arguing. Her father's facial expression was angry. Marcus had his fists clenched. There was another photo, darker, blurred, perhaps taken from a distance. There was her father's body on the ground, face down next to a puddle, and a few feet behind, Marcus standing and looking on. Chloe fell to her knees. That image was like a dagger. It confirmed everything. Marcus was there. It wasn't an accident. There was something more, something no one had said. And she had been married all this time to a man who might have been involved in her father's death. The jigsaw puzzle pieces fit together. Her mother's suspicions, Marcus's evasiveness, the blood on the shirt, the chained lies. She put the photo back. She sat on the edge of the bed with a lost look. Now it was no longer just a betrayal. It was a crime. And silence could no longer be part of the plan. Now it was a threat, and the time for keeping quiet was running out. The confrontation and the unveiling. Chloe knew she was on the verge of something irreversible. The pieces were now on the table. Marcus's false face, the debts, the lies, the betrayal. The photograph confirming his presence at the scene where her father had died, and the inheritance he thought was gone. The same one she still held intact as her last card, her only shield. But now the fear wasn't of losing money, but of losing herself if she remained silent. Throughout the night, she repeated the same question over and over. How do you confront someone with whom you shared an entire life, knowing that person is no longer the same? Or perhaps never was? The next morning, while Marcus was showering, Chloe checked her phone's voice recorder and made sure it was ready. She put it in her apron pocket along with her keys and sat in the kitchen with a cup of coffee she had no intention of drinking. When he came out of the bathroom with a towel around his neck, she waited for him, her eyes fixed on the table. We need to talk, she said without raising her voice. Again, isn't everything that's happening enough? Yes, but this time I want answers. Marcus tensed. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but Chloe noticed it. His body, his gaze, his tone, everything about him changed. He walked to the table and sat opposite her. Answers about what? About you. About Lucy. About the house. About my father. About what you're planning. Marcus let out a dry laugh. You're delusional. No, I'm waking up. And you're not ready for that. He stood up abruptly and started pacing the kitchen like a caged animal. Are you spying on me now? Are you following me? Checking my things? I just did what I had to. I got tired of living a lie. I'm no longer afraid to know who you really are. Marcus turned, and there was no trace of the man who feigned tenderness in his eyes. He was another person, a hard, cold, empty gaze. You don't know anything. You don't understand what it's like to fight every day to have something. You got lucky. That inheritance fell from the sky, and you didn't even know how to use it. That's why you planned to steal it. That's why you cheated on me with Lucy. The name Lucy was like a spark. Marcus exploded. You're an ingrate. I always knew you were weak. You don't know what I did to get that money. What I was capable of sacrificing so you could have a decent life. A decent life or a controlled life? Marcus stepped closer, his eyes overflowing with rage. Don't you dare talk to me like that. And you dare to hide things from me for years? To manipulate me? To be involved in my father's death? For an instant, everything stopped. The silence was brutal. Chloe didn't know if he was going to scream, deny it, or admit it. Marcus took a step back. His shoulders trembled. Then he let out a low, bitter laugh. Your father was an obstacle. You were a naive girl. Do you think life is built on love? No. Life is built on power, on control. Chloe pressed the recorder button in her pocket. Everything was being logged. And what will you do now? Are you going to kick me out? Go with Lucy and start a new life. Marcus approached again, calmer, almost cynical. Lucy is useful, just as you were for years, but I don't need to act anymore. Now the cards are on the table. Yes. And you have no idea how badly you played. He didn't reply. He turned and slammed the door as he left the house. Chloe was left trembling, not out of fear, but because of the truth. There was no going back. She had heard it with her own ears. It was no longer just an emotional deception. He was a monster without remorse. Hours later, she received a call from the hospital. Her mother had worsened. She rushed there. She found her weak, connected to a machine that emitted a constant beep. Her face was pale, her lips parched. Mom, I'm here. Petronila could barely speak. Chloe leaned in, took her hand, and at that moment, her mother opened her eyes and said with effort, Your father always knew. He told me before he died that Marcus wasn't trustworthy, that he had seen things, that he was involved with dangerous people. That's why they argued. Yes, that night your father confronted him. He told him that if he hurt you, he would get him out of your life, but he didn't succeed. You never knew. The words faded between sighs. Chloe cried in silence. She felt her skin burning, that she could no longer pretend strength, that her heart was tearing apart. She spent the night at the hospital. The next day she made a decision. She had to talk to Lucy. She didn't know how to contact her, but asked Linda for help. They checked social media, friend registries, and finally found an address. Chloe went alone. She knocked on the door of a simple apartment in a residential area. Lucy opened it. She was surprised. She didn't expect to see her. She didn't speak either. She just looked at her with fear, like someone who knows something isn't right. I need to talk to you, Chloe said. Just 10 minutes. I'm not here to attack you. I just want you to know the truth. Lucy let her in. They were alone. They sat in the living room. Chloe took a sheet out of an envelope. It was the house transfer document in Lucy's name. Did you know about this? Lucy looked at her, confused. Marcus told me it was an investment, that he was helping me because you mistreated him. He told me you locked him up, that you wouldn't feed him, that you controlled him. Chloe took a deep breath. He lied to you. I never did that. He manipulated you. He used you just like he used me. Lucy fell silent. Then she lowered her head. I didn't know. I believed him. He told me he was going to leave you, that he was in love, that you wanted to kill him. Does that really sound logical to you? Lucy broke down. She cried hard. I didn't know. I'm so stupid. I didn't know he was capable of so much. Chloe hugged her, not out of compassion, but because she had been there too. Deceived, manipulated, trapped. You're not stupid. You just trusted someone who knew how to lie. Lucy took a breath, wiped her face. What are you going to do? I'm going to tell the truth. All of it. Chloe left with a firm decision. She returned home, reviewed the recordings, put together a folder with evidence. Photos, papers, copies of transfers. Then she wrote a letter. In it, she explained everything she had lived through, what she had feigned, what she had discovered. She published it on social media, sent it to a few independent journalists, and accompanied the text with a 10-minute video. In the video, she spoke calmly, her voice firm, but broken at the right moments. She didn't present herself as a victim or a heroine, only as a woman who could no longer be silent. I am not telling this to seek revenge. I am telling it so that no one else falls into the trap of a false smile, so that women understand that not everything that glitters is love, and that sometimes the enemy sleeps under the same roof. The video went viral within hours, and that was just the first part of her emotional revenge, because Chloe was no longer willing to remain silent. There was no more fear, only truth. And the truth was ready to come to light. Justice and a new beginning. A few hours after uploading the video, she turned off her cell phone and sat by the window. She didn't know what would happen. She didn't know if anyone would believe her, if she would be scrutinized, if people would think she was exaggerating, if Marcus would dare to return. But there was something she knew with absolute certainty. She was no longer willing to live as a shadow in her own house. For years, she had been the woman who served breakfast with a smile, who swallowed her doubts, who justified her husband's absences, who kept quiet about the phrases that made her feel less. Now she was different. No more silences, no more accepted lies. Fear, when confronted, loses its power. The next day, when she turned on her cell phone, she had over 300 notifications. The video had been shared thousands of times. Comments, private messages, invitations to shows, journalists wanting to know her story, women thanking her, others telling their own. It was as if a dam had broken, as if Chloe's voice had awakened something many had trapped in their chests. Linda arrived at the house almost breathless. "Did you see what you caused?" she said, her eyes shining with pride. "You're everywhere. Even a lawyer wrote me asking if she could help you formalize a complaint." Chloe didn't smile. She thanked her with her eyes, but she didn't celebrate, because even though everyone applauded her, she still felt a deep sadness. Her mother was dying, and Marcus was still free. 2 days passed, then 3. Marcus didn't appear. The phone stopped ringing. His room remained untouched, as if time had stopped within those walls. Every night, Chloe checked that all the doors were locked, not out of physical fear, but because of that feeling that something dark still lingered. Until Lucy appeared at her door, trembling, with a folder in her hand. "I know where he is," she said as soon as Chloe opened the door. They were in the living room. Lucy couldn't stop crying. "He went to the border. He has contacts there. He wants to cross into another country. He confessed it to me in a call. He told me that if I reported him, he'd ruin my life, but I don't care anymore." She opened the folder. It contained copies of documents, receipts, emails, a complete line of transactions, fake accounts, fictitious names, hidden money. "All of this is yours, it belongs to you. He just wanted to use me to escape. He told me that with you, there was no future, that you were sick, that you were going to end up in a mental institution." Chloe said nothing. She listened, but inside every word was a shot. "And why are you giving me this?" she asked softly. "Because I was used, too. And because you deserve justice." Lucy left before Chloe could say anything more. She left her with the folder in her hands and her soul trembling. That same night, Chloe met with Robert, the lawyer. She gave him everything: photos, recordings, documents, papers. She asked him to do what was necessary. The case was presented to the authorities. A criminal file was opened. An arrest warrant was requested for fraud, attempted theft, and they reopened the file on her father's death. Everything moved quickly. The viral video had created media pressure. No one wanted to look like the prosecutor who ignored the woman who had publicly denounced an attempted homicide. Marcus, upon hearing the news, tried to hide, but Lucy also reported him. They tracked him down through a hotel reservation he made under a false name. He was captured on the 4th day outside the city with fake identification and a backpack full of cash. When the news was confirmed, Chloe was at the hospital, sitting next to her mother's bed. Petronila no longer spoke. She breathed with difficulty, her skin increasingly pale. The doctors told her it was a matter of hours. Chloe took her hand, caressed it, and spoke into her ear. "It's all over, Mom. I'm okay. I'm safe. You were right, and I thank you with all my heart." Petronila opened her eyes one last time. She looked at her daughter, smiled slightly, and then closed her eyelids with the peace of someone who had no loose ends. She died in silence, without pain, knowing that her daughter was no longer anyone's victim. Chloe didn't cry immediately. She just hugged her, kissed her forehead, then sat there for hours as if the world had stopped. The funeral was simple. A few neighbors accompanied her. Linda didn't leave her side. Lucy also attended. She sat silently in a corner. She didn't say a word, but her face was full of guilt. Days later, Chloe received a letter. It was handwritten. It was from Petronila. Linda gave it to her. She had kept it in case anything happened. It read, "You are worth more than any fortune. Never forget that. Money can disappear, but your dignity is the only thing no one can steal from you. Don't let the past chain you. Not all men are monsters. But not all monsters show fangs. I saw what you didn't want to see. Forgive me for not saying it sooner. I wanted to protect you. Today, I know you can protect yourself. I am proud of you. Love, Mom." Chloe read the letter with trembling hands. Then she folded it carefully and put it in a box along with the photo of her father. Outside, the press continued to look for her. Some wanted interviews. Others wanted her to participate in conferences. She became a public figure, a voice for many. But she wasn't looking for fame. She was only looking to heal. She began attending support groups. She talked to women who had experienced silent abuse. She helped identify signs. She taught them to look beyond pretty words. Her story became a warning, a banner. One morning, returning from one of those meetings, she found a white envelope on her doorstep. It had no sender or address, only her name written by hand. She opened it cautiously. Inside, a note written in shaky handwriting. Not everything was a lie. I suffered too. This child is not to blame. He is also part of this story. And next to the note, a photo. A small child, no more than 3 years old. Dark eyes, curly hair. Smiling. Chloe felt a chill run through her body. Whose child was this? Who had sent her that letter? What connection did he have to everything she had lived through? The answers were hiding in the shadows again, but Chloe was no longer the same. She was no longer afraid. Now, she was ready to seek the truth to the very end. The legacy of truth, Simon. The photograph of the child remained on the table next to the cup of cold coffee that Chloe hadn't touched. The letter was unsigned. The words were few, but every line was loaded with a tension that squeezed her chest. This child was not to blame, and at the same time, he was the result of something she still didn't fully understand. The story she thought was closed had just opened a new crack, one she wasn't sure she was willing to explore. She spent the night awake. She walked around the house, touched the door frames, opened the windows, reread the letter. Part of her wanted to ignore it. She had suffered enough. Why continue to carry what Marcus had left behind? He had been her executioner, her silent executioner for years. And now, in his downfall, he left behind traces, consequences, as if his shadow would never fully retreat. But another deeper, older, more human part felt a pang. Because even though she didn't know the child, even though she didn't know his name, the image of those eyes had touched her. Something in that look reminded her of someone, herself, perhaps her childhood loneliness. It wasn't long before she received another notification. Robert, the lawyer, called her at noon. Chloe, something else has arrived at the office. An envelope came from Child Services. It seems it's official about the boy. Yes. They want to know if you are willing to meet him. He's in state custody. Marcus registered your name as an emergency contact before he was arrested. And his mother died in childbirth, according to records. There's no other direct family. He's a minor, only 3 years old. Where is he? He's in a temporary foster home. The case hasn't been closed, but you could request custody if you wish. She didn't give an answer at that moment. She hung up. She stood with the phone in her hand, staring at the blank screen. Suddenly, she felt that everything she had lived through, every betrayal, every tear, every silence, had led her to this very point. A decision, a new beginning, a wound that could remain open or transform into something greater than the pain. That same afternoon, she went to the Child Services Center. She was received courteously. The social worker was a woman with a soft voice and a compassionate gaze. She explained that the boy was healthy, but showed signs of anxiety. He had trouble sleeping. He didn't talk much. He clung to an old stuffed animal as if all his security resided in it. Does he know anything about his father? Chloe asked. Only that he's gone. He doesn't ask much. He observes more than he talks. They led her to a small room, pastel colors on the walls, toys on shelves, a clean carpet. There he was sitting on the floor playing with wooden blocks. He wore light blue overalls and worn sneakers. His curly hair fell over his forehead. He looked up when she entered. Chloe stood still. The boy looked at her without fear, without joy. Just with that intensity that only very lonely children are capable of sustaining. She didn't approach immediately. She just sat down across from him at a safe distance. "Hello," she said. He didn't reply. He continued to watch her. "My name is Chloe." Silence. He lowered his gaze, touched the stuffed animal, and murmured something she didn't understand. Then, without warning, he extended one of the wooden blocks to her. It was a minimal gesture, but for Chloe it was like an opening, as if he were saying, without words, you can be here. They stayed in that room for almost an hour. They didn't talk, they just shared the space. In the end, when she got up to leave, he walked over and clutched her hand tightly. "You're leaving?" His voice was barely a whisper. Chloe felt something break inside her. "Yes, but if you want, I can come back." He nodded without letting go. "Do you have a name?" she asked. "They call me Simon," he replied softly. She didn't sleep that night, not from sadness, not from anxiety, but from reflection. She had life in her hands. She could walk away from everything, start another story without burdens. She had survived hell. No one was forcing her to take on more responsibility. But something told her that this child was not a burden, He was an opportunity, not to redeem Marcus, not to save anyone, but to create something new, a bond free of lies, control, and violence. On the third day, she returned to the center and formally requested the start of the custody process. It wasn't simple. There were procedures, evaluations, interviews, but little by little, the papers were signed. The story began to take another form. Simon arrived at her house with a small backpack. He didn't bring much, just his stuffed animal and a notebook with empty pages. Chloe prepared a room for him with what she had. Nothing luxurious, but warm, with drawings on the wall, clean sheets, and a lamp with soft light. The first night he slept clinging to her. He cried a little, then fell silent, and at dawn when she opened her eyes he was still there, hugging her, breathing calmly. Weeks passed. Simon began to talk more. To play, to laugh. Chloe discovered a tenderness in him that she thought was lost. She wasn't his biological mother, but love doesn't understand biology. It understands presence, care, choice. Meanwhile, the story continued in the media. Some wanted to know why she had decided to keep her ex-husband's child. Others judged her, accusing her of weakness, but she didn't respond. She had learned that not everything needs to be explained. Some decisions are only understood with time. Lucy wrote her a letter. She apologized for everything. She said she had started therapy, was working on rebuilding her life, and admired Chloe's courage. Linda remained by her side, no longer as an advisor, but as a witness to the transformation. "Look at you," she said one afternoon while having coffee on the porch. "You pretended to lose everything, and you gained the one thing that is priceless." Chloe smiled, truly, for the first time in a long time. Months passed. Simon started school. He learned to read, to draw, to name his emotions. Chloe accompanied him every step of the way. They laughed together, they made mistakes together, they learned together. A year later, she published a book. The Day I Pretended to Lose Everything to Find Myself. It wasn't a story of revenge or a chronicle of suffering. It was a story of awakening, of how pain can break, yes, but also open, of how betrayal can be the push that forces you to look inward, to decide to free yourself. On the last page, she wrote one single phrase, one that summarized the entire story. "Sometimes losing everything is the only way to know who you really are and who should never have been by your side." What did you think of this story? There are many people, like Chloe, living silent battles every day. Our hope is that her voice has resonated within you too. If this story touched your heart, share it. Make more people feel accompanied. Be part of the change. Tell us in the comments what you would have done in her place, and which city you're watching from. Reading your comments makes us feel closer to you. And if you haven't already, like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. Every gesture from you is a sign that these stories must continue to be told. Don't go yet. Our next compelling story is already appearing on your screen. Click on any of them and continue exploring this universe of real, moving, and necessary tales. Thank you for being here. Thank you for feeling with us. We send you a huge hug wherever you are. See you next time.